West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
This is the first live interview you've done in the media. It is the second live interview you have done in life. The first one was your testimony. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and it's an honor to have this as my first live interview. Well, second live interview, I guess.
Second live interview. The first one much more consequential than this one, don't worry. I mean, it's been 15 months since that testimony. Your life has changed dramatically since then. I said, based on what I read in your book, but I didn't ask you about this ahead of time, I said in my introductory remarks that a lot of the reason that people haven't heard from you or seen you out in the world in the last 15 months is, at least in part, because of concerns about your security. Is that fair? Is that still a real live concern for you?
That's a fair assessment, yes.
How are you taking care of yourself in that regard? I mean, you don't have to tell me anything I shouldn't know.
No, you're fine. Open book. It's been difficult in a lot of ways. It's open. This year has helped me open my eyes to the dangers that Trump actually poses on people in these situations. Mm-hmm. And I'm not the only one. And I wish I could say I'd be the last person, but unfortunately I won't. And that's what he does to people that he thinks that speak out against him or that detract from him. And it's one of the more dangerous things about Donald Trump, too. This is something we've seen time and time again, and it shouldn't have to be like this.
You write about, in the book, repeatedly about your regret for having not supported him, but specifically for having facilitated some of the political attacks that he launched as president on people that were designed the way he designs them, to hurt people maximally and in some cases to expose them to danger. Did that give you any insight into why he needs politics to work that way for him, and any insight into how to combat it?
It gave me an insight into his psyche while I was writing the book and helping understand my circumstances with it, and what I dealt with after I testified. But with that said, it helped also open my eyes to what he wants from people. He wants to know that he's getting a reaction. He thrives when he has an audience. It could be a negative audience. It could be an audience that he likes. It could be his base. But what he needs is to hear people reacting to him. And that's when he knows in his mind that he has been successful to something.
Is that why you've never responded to his attacks on you?
I've never responded to his attacks on me because I don't need to give them oxygen. He is going to say what he's going to say, and he said much worse things about much better people than I am.
The kind of pressure that you describe experiencing to protect Mr. Trump, I mean, some of it was self-directed, right? You say at one point in the book, and it struck me, you said that you adored him at one point, that you were and are very much still a Republican, that you believed in what he was trying to do for the country. You wanted to be a good staffer. You wanted to serve the White House. You wanted to do right by your colleagues. And that sort of easily leads toward the next post-presidential project for him, which is protecting him from all the investigations around January 6th and everything else. But that pressure not only came from you, it also came from his world. You didn't have financial resources to hire your own lawyer. You didn't have access to a lawyer at the outset who would represent you for free. You ended up with a Trump world lawyer who you describe as having not told you to lie, but encouraged you to not tell everything that you knew. That pressure is it's not just a Cassidy Hutchinson biographical detail, it is a live issue for a lot of people right now. There's a lot of people in multiple jurisdictions deciding if how they're going to respond to a subpoena, what they may testify to in court, what they're going to do about their legal representation. This is a live issue for a lot of people right now. And some of them may be watching right now. What would you say to them about how to balance the equities in that kind of a calculation?
In my opinion, I don't know if there really is a way to balance the equities. If you have a self-interest of being completely forthcoming and truthful in what you're witnessing that could potentially hurt or damage Mr. Trump, and not even speaking to the issues of legal counsel, just as a person knowing what I experienced. And like you said, some of it was self-inflicted for me. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew how I felt about these circumstances surrounding January 6th. But I also was scared, to be frank. I was scared at times to make that break. Mm-hmm. I had seen what happened to some of my former colleagues who had made that break and how they became the subjects of the vitriol and the vile rhetoric that comes out of Mr. Trump and his associates when you break with him. If I were to say anything to the people, though, that may be finding themselves in a similar situation to the situation that I found myself in, or just that they want to make that break, it's possible. We can't. And what I think is, in my opinion, again, what I think is damaging in ways is isolating the people that come out and then questioning why they did. It is hard to come out. It was hard to find my way out because of what we said. I had financial limitations and I did have other counsel, but it was also hard coming out on the outside because I didn't know if I'd be welcomed by people. So I think that, if we can create and foster an environment where people feel that they're welcomed and that there is a life on the other side, which is one of the more eye-opening parts of this experience for me too, is that there are good people in this world that want to help and that are there and that have similar interests that we do, that we all want the Republic to survive. We all should want this Republic to survive. But in the way that Mr. Trump's trajectory currently is going, I'm not confident that he will have it survive. And, I would just encourage them to think about that.
When you say that, we speak at a moment when Mr. Trump is dozens of points ahead of his nearest opponent in the Republican presidential primary. The tone in the political press about what's happening in the Republican presidential primary is that even people who support his competitors are effectively conceding that he's going to be the nominee. Republicans seem poised to choose him again, even after what happened the last time, and specifically what you were able to tell the country about what it was like inside the White House. I was struck in the book, not just about what you said about January 6th, but some of the other ways that you described what was bad about him as a president. On COVID, you said, I doubt any politician could have led the country through the deadliest pandemic in 100 years without making errors of judgment and execution. But of all the people in the world, President Trump was uniquely unsuited to the challenge. He lacked empathy and was stubborn and impatient. You said he had a restless, impulsive personality. You described his attention span not being up to an average meeting. I noticed that his eyes often wandered the room when the meetings outlasted his attention span. Ultimately, you described what happened on January 6th as, from him, at a minimum, a shocking dereliction of duty. I mean, all of the things that you described from having seen him up close are public record now.
Right.
None of these things are secrets. Why do you think your fellow Republicans want him more than they want anybody else as their next candidate for the White House?
I can't speak to the psyche of I won't say my fellow Republicans, because I do not think that we are a part of the same Republican Party. I still consider myself a Republican. I consider myself a Republican in the sense of Senator Mitt Romney and the Reagan Republican Party. I believe that the Republican Party needs a strong conservative party. I do not believe that Mr. Trump is a strong Republican, but in this next election cycle, in my opinion, it's the make or break moment for the Republican Party. Now is the time. If these politicians, these men and some women that are currently in Congress want to make the break and want to take the stand, they have to do it now. We can't wait any longer for them to do it. I don't know why they're so willing to support him. I think it's extremely disappointing, and it is not a hard issue to take. We're talking about a man who, at the very essence of his being, almost destroyed democracy in one day, and he wants to do it again. He wants to run for president to do it again. He's been indicted 4 times since January 6th. I would not have a clear conscience and be able to sleep at night if I were a Republican in Congress that supported Donald Trump. And, I think that if they're not willing to split with that, then we're in serious danger for the party.
You write in the book in detail about your interactions with the January 6th committee. You did 6 interviews with them plus the live testimony. But then you also say that you met, I believe, 3 times with Justice Department personnel and prosecutors and once with the Fulton County grand jury. Is that all correct? Do you expect to be called to testify in any of the Trump trials?
I have fully complied with all government investigations in all entities thus far, and I will continue to do so.
But you can't talk about whether you're going to testify.
If or when I am asked to testify, I will comply as fully as I have in the past.
Did prosecutors involved in any of those conversations or any of the live cases ask you to leave certain topics out of the book?
No, everything that is in the book is also consistent with my transcripts that are on the record with the government or with the January 6th committee.
Okay.
Well, everything pertaining to the election fraud.
Yeah.
And Mr. Trump's attempt to overthrow the government to stay in power. All in the public record.
One of the things that you describe in some detail in the book that I don't just quite know what to make of involves your direct boss, Mark Meadows. I've been describing you the shorthand, and you use this in the book. You say sort of chief of staff to the chief of staff. You're essentially the top staffer to Mr. Meadows. So you're with him a lot of the time. You definitely know what's going on in his life. You're close to him in the work sense every day that he's in the office. And yet there is some mystery that I don't totally understand as to what he was burning in his fireplace and to what he was doing with either classified or previously classified documents related to Crossfire Hurricane, related to the Russia investigation. Are you describing what appeared to you to be either mishandling of classified information or mishandling of presidential records, destruction of presidential records, which of course is not allowed?
The final days, it obviously was chaotic in a number of ways. I was under the impression, and I know there were several of my colleagues that were under the impression that how classified documents were being handled was not within proper protocol. Now, with saying that, I think it speaks also just to how reckless and careless much of the administration was, not taking classified document protocol seriously a lot of the time. We've seen that with Mr. Trump as well. But, specific to my experience with Mr. Meadows in the final days of the administration, I talk about it a lot in the book to shed light on how chaotic things were. But, I can't really speak to what he was doing. I would leave that as a question to him.
I mean, it does sound like there were confrontations in the White House, including those that involved you, related to perceived mishandling of sensitive information.
That's correct.
I dropped the bag on Pat Cipolloni's floor. Here are your classified documents back from the reporters, Mark. I didn't hide my contempt, my words rife with sarcasm. Mark and Mr. Cipollone peered into the bag. I saw Mark swallow hard. Pat shot me a piercing look. Overwhelmed, Pat agonized. Seriously, we do not have time for this. I was already walking out of his office. You then describe Mr. Meadows at 11:45 a.m. on Inauguration Day, asking the Secret Service how quickly they can get to the Justice Department because he wants to try to declassify something literally in the last 15 minutes when Donald Trump is president.
Joe Biden's about to get sworn in, so yes.
What was that about? What was he trying to do?
That specific binder was pertinent to Crossfire Hurricane, which, for the record, at the time, I had no idea what Crossfire Hurricane was. But I, looking at the bigger picture here, bringing it back to next year's election, these people very well could be in power again. And do we want people who have already shown that they're willing and want to overthrow an election, for a duly elected president, which is the pinnacle of our democracy? Do we want to put people like that back in power? Do we want to put people back in power that have mishandled and have been showed to mishandle the most sensitive national security secrets that our nation has? That's the question that we need to ask ourselves.
We got a statement from a spokesperson for Mr. Meadows tonight, not sort of just vaguely casting aspersions at you, it's most of the statement, but then saying much of her claims in this book about Mr. Meadows or otherwise are filled with half-truths, falsehoods, and purposefully omitting context to sell books. Mr. Meadows is essentially just casting aspersions on your character, saying that you are making things up out of whole cloth in order to make money. You worked so closely with him for a long time, but you also describe in the book that you never really trusted him. And there are several instances you describe in which he flat out lied to you, even on close working matters where you should have been on the same side. I should just ask for a response to you for that statement and ask you what you think happened between you and Mark Meadows.
I don't think there was anything necessarily negative to happen between me and Mark Meadows. I was very outspoken after January 6th about how I felt about it. Mark and I also knew that we were two different people, and that's okay. We regularly talked about it. We would regularly joke about it, that I was more moderate than he was, but we did in large part work well together.
More ideologically moderate.
Yes, yes, ideologically moderate, more so than he was. But putting that aside, that in an environment like that, that doesn't matter as much. In terms of his statement, I would encourage him to go testify under oath if he thinks that what is in the book and what I have testified to under oath, which is consistent with what is in the book, he can go testify under oath if he has strong feelings about that.
Were you disappointed that the Justice Department elected not to prosecute him for contempt of Congress when he ignored the congressional subpoena that you responded to from the January 6th investigation?
I'll leave it to Mr. Meadows and his team to respond to that. What I will say is I hope that Mark is now doing the right thing. What I define as the right thing, which is coming forth and honoring your oath that you swore to protect your country, not your president.
It is Tuesday, the 26th of September of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. It always has, and it always will. Okay, tagline taken care of, and here we go. Yes, we had a particularly long opening at the opening because I deemed it important. That was a fairly impressive interview that Rachel had with Cassidy Hutchinson. Now, let us remember, Cassidy is still a Republican. All right. She pines for the days when the Republican Party were Reagan Republicans. Well, she'll come to learn at some point that maybe those are also the error of her ways. Let's just be clear. All right. She considered herself more moderate than Mark Meadows. Well, that's good, because Meadows is a raving lunatic. I still remember him crying when Elijah Cummings, I think Elijah Cummings was chairing a committee. And Meadows cried because someone had accused him of being, like, if not a racist, a bigot. And he basically said that some of his best friends are black people, and it's Elijah Cummings right next to me. He's one of my best friends, and he's black. And I'm going, did he just say some of his best friends are black? Are you kidding me? And the press just left it at that. Oh, well, he's friends with Elijah Cummings. It must be okay. No, it's not. All right? If somebody says some of their best friends are black, it's still othering. Get it? You're still, like, putting them in some inferior position because, they're so special. They're my friends. Sounds bigoted to me, and that's exactly what it is. Anyway, it's not hard to be more moderate than Mark. Burning documents, White House documents, evidence, I suppose, is what it would normally be called in a court of law. Burning them. They ought to upgrade the White House a little bit more, because apparently these fireplace flues are not drawing the smoke up enough if Mark Meadows' clothes are coming back smelling like a bonfire, according to his wife. Okay. I'm just saying. Seems a little untoward. And, but that's okay. According to polls in some major news organizations that are supposed to be respectable, that only polled a fraction of registered Democrats as opposed to Republicans. And now they're running with this idea that Trump is in some insurmountable lead so early, so we'll just impeach Joe Biden and get him out of the way before Trump's trials come to fruition, which will be long after the administration of Joe Biden's next presidency, because that's how slow the wheels of justice turn. Well, I don't know, maybe some things will be speeded up. Well, since we had such a long opening, we're going to get right into what we have in store for you here for the rest of this salon that we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. So, on the rest of the menu, as we continue here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, a white neighbor in Tony Forest Hills, New York, is sued for hosing down his prominent black neighbors and their prominent black dinner guests during a catered dinner in their spacious backyard garden. California Governor Gavin Newsom signed a bill to ban school boards from rejecting textbooks based on their teachings about the contributions of people from different racial backgrounds, sexual orientations, and gender identities. And rogue Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito invented an entirely new rule just for himself. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the United States offered Poland a rare loan of $2 billion to modernize its military. And independent UN-backed human rights experts said they have turned up continued evidence of war crimes committed by Russian forces in Ukraine and are looking into genocide allegations. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and we thank Kelly for doing so. Across the page from that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the left, right across from that chat room link, is the link to our Patreon page. And if you became a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month, it really does help us tremendously in putting a big dent in the bills and other costs running this powerhouse of resistance. So thank you for your generosity in helping us fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many, many years ago. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on those platforms as well. And also, heck, Tumblr, Instagram, Facebook, wherever, at Justice Putnam, or simply as Justice Putnam. And I post the show notes and links diary 10 minutes before showtime. And then that's where you can find, if you follow those social media feeds, you'll be able to get to those show notes and links and read the actual articles by the actual reporters. Okay. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes. Did I say Stitcher? Stitcher doesn't exist anymore. I apologize. SiriusXM took it away from us. Oh, my. Anyway, pick up those podcasts, and thank you. Wherever podcasts can be found, just not on Stitcher. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by Justin Rorlick out of the Daily Beast. When Roosevelt Duraceau turned 47 last year, her brother and sister-in-law hosted a small surprise party to celebrate. Dr. Eve Ducereau, chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine at Manhattan's Lenox Hill Hospital, and his designer wife, Claude, had about 15 guests over on September 17th, 2022, a Saturday evening, for a 9-course dinner in the back garden of their gracious Forest Hills home. The occasion was especially joyous for Roosevelt, who had recently gotten engaged. Eves, who in 2020 was the first physician in the U.S. to receive the COVID vaccine, and Roosevelt, a U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services asylum officer based out of D.C., are Haitian American, and all but one of the guests at the gathering were Black or Latino. Among them were friends of Rosevany's from Fordham Law School, where she earned her J.D., along with attorneys from the Justice Department Civil Rights Division and New York State Governor Katie Hochul's administration, 2 bank executives, a New Jersey public schools administrator, and at least 1 public defender, high-powered music industry player Rigo Morales, who co-founded the Recording Academy's Black Music Collective, and Roosevelt's fiancé, the co-founder and CEO of a cybersecurity risk management consultancy. The meal was catered by celebrity chef Vanessa Cantave, the 2011 winner of Bravo cooking competition show Rocco's Dinner Party. But as things started to draw to a close, an unidentified white woman showed up with a large, menacing German shepherd and demanded that the music playing in the backyard be turned down, according to an astonishing lawsuit obtained by the Daily Beast. When the effort to silence plaintiffs and end their celebration apparently didn't happen fast enough, the party abruptly and forcefully ended when a white neighbor grabbed his backyard hose and started hosing the guests to get them to disperse. creating a scene reminiscent of 1960s Birmingham, Alabama, when white law enforcement officers used fire hoses to douse, assault, and batter African Americans participating in civil rights demonstrations in an attempt to get them to comply and disperse, the complaint states. The neighbor, a married father of two, identified in court filings as 48-year-old Marcus Rosebrock, allegedly turned his hose on the gas again and again, continually increasing the water pressure until they were not only drenched, but also thoroughly humiliated. We're talking about lawyers from the Justice Department and Katie Hochul's administration. Mina Q. Malik, who along with co-counsel Derek Sells is representing the Dussaults and others who were at the dinner party, she told the Daily Beast that she happened to be in Alabama when the case came into her office. I was appalled and disgusted that water hosing and German shepherds were being used against people of color in New York City in 2022. I was in utter disbelief, she said. Well, to just finish up this story rather quickly, the woman who is only referred to as Jane Doe in the filing brought a giant German shepherd into these people's house, into their foyer, and told them, "Get out. We're done with you." And this garden hose actually sounds more like a fire hose, because according to the complaint, people were actually afraid for their physical safety because the water pressure was knocking them on their butts. And the white neighbor, just as an aside, is a German national. Does he have a green card? Sophie Austin of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. California Governor Gavin Newsom signed a bill yesterday, Monday, to ban school boards from rejecting textbooks based on their teachings about the contributions of people from different racial backgrounds, sexual orientations, and gender identities. Newsom called the measure long overdue. From Temecula to Tallahassee, fringe ideologues across the country are attempting to whitewash history and ban books from schools, Newsom said in a statement. With this new law, we're cementing California's role as the true freedom state, a place where families, not political fanatics, have the freedom to decide what's right for them. This bill takes effect immediately. Us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Although the U.S. Supreme Court has been resisting calls to adopt an official ethics code, the 9 justices did sign on April 25th a statement on ethics principles and practices and submitted it to the Senate Judiciary Committee. The statement said that when it comes to recusal, justices should follow the same general principles and statutory standards as other federal judges. In other words, recuse themselves when there is a possible conflict of interest. But according to law professor Stephen Lubit, Alito refused to recuse himself from a major tax case. In an article published by the Daily Beast on September 25th, Lubit explains instead of applying statutory law or Supreme Court precedents, Alito invented an entirely new rule never before invoked by any justice, claiming that recusal is simply the personal decision of each justice. Alito announced that he would recuse himself only on the basis of a so-called sound reason, an undefined and previously unknown rationale that has no inherent meaning. Lubit draws a contrast between what the late Scalia had to say about recusal and Alito's recent argument. Scalia, Lubit notes, did not believe that recusal was just a matter of personal choice. As I pointed out before, Lubit argues, the Constitution vests the judicial power of the United States in one Supreme Court, not 9 Supreme Justices. No single justice should be able to decide that his personal decisions are above the law. Well, we'll see where that goes. And where we are going right now is to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
It's 2016 and we're in Prospect Park, Brooklyn. A live orchestra and choir perform opera music while thousands of people press tiny cardboard boxes to their faces. This is the Hubble Cantata.
Yeah, so these virtual reality headsets are pretty jank, but the scenes the audience is looking at through them are majestic. It's a 360-degree view of some of the most stunning galaxies that astronomers have ever captured. Meanwhile, sweeping classical music that matches the images just envelops the audience. All right, well, whoosh, 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 Hubble Cantata, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Jason, bring us in.
Okay, let's do it. You ready? You're listening to Scientific American's Science Quickly. I'm Jason Drakeford. I'm an animator and video journalist.
And I'm Timmy Broderick. I'm a freelance journalist who covers disability and a recent intern at SciAm. This week, we are taking over the feed and blasting off into space. We're going to take you on a journey through the stars.
Welcome to part 1 of a 3-part fascination on how scientists and artists are turning space into sound. You've seen photographs from the Hubble and the James Webb Space Telescope, but now get ready to hear them, including one brand new sonification that has never been publicly released.
But to get to the stars, we need to start somewhere a little bit closer to home.
What we did in the park was essentially create an 8-point loudspeaker system so that people in the park could feel like they were traveling through space in this kind of completely enveloped sound to essentially take you as a viewer suspended in space with the Earth at your toes, going through this incredible journey finally through the Orion Nebula.
This is Paola Prestini. She's an award-winning composer who's collaborated with poets and artists and scientists, and she also likes to say she paints with data.
My training is obviously in composition. I like to say that I'm essentially an explorer, and I do that mainly through sound.
Prestini isn't the only one turning astronomical data into sound. You have other artists and scientists who are using markers such as orbital paths and star brightness to craft their own symphonies. It's led to the birth of a new field, astronomical sonification.
There's this idea that there's no sound in space because we can't hear them. In fact, there's been incredible explorations, most recently with black holes, of pitching, the waves up so that we can actually hear them with human ears.
Astronomy has always been a visual science, but data doesn't really care how it's presented. Scientists have just been defaulting to images, and that's changing now.
Yeah, turning astronomical data into sound is not just cool. These soundscapes can also inspire folks who are blind and visually impaired, in the same way that you or I, Jason, are inspired by those images from Hubble and the JWST. And also, these sounds might lead to some discoveries, too. To get there, the field is going to need to be more formalized. Should a bright star lead to a low pitch or a high pitch? Is a cello or an oboe a better instrument to capture a comet's path? Right now, there's just no standardization.
In terms of sonification, and as composers, and we kind of make up these rules.
Timmy, okay, what the hell even is a sonification?
Right. So sonification is exactly what it sounds like. It's turning data into sound. You can sonify the stock market by making a piano's note correspond to the nightly closing stock number. Or, if you want to be silly, you could sonify the annual number of Prussian cavalry members killed by horse kicks, starting in 1875. In both of these clips, you can hear the data pretty clearly. What Paola is doing is a little different. The notes, dynamics, instrumentation of the Hubble cantata don't map exactly to the stars or galaxies that people saw in that VR simulation. Paola was more inspired by the images. Other scientists are doing that one-to-one mapping.
So what you're hearing right now is a sonification of planetary orbits from astrophysicist Matt Russo.
The piece captures data from 40 light-years away in the TRAPPIST-1 system.
7 rocky planets orbit TRAPPIST-1, and each time a planet passes in front of a star, it blocks a little bit of light.
The notes you're hearing are planets completing their orbits. This is what is called an orbital frequency. Matt multiplied each planet's frequency and turned these stellar passages into specific musical notes. He then stacked the frequencies, added drums for when neighboring planets pass one another, and voila.
When I saw the pattern in their orbits, I could quickly calculate which notes that would correspond to, and I knew it would be a really pleasing, beautiful chord altogether.
Matt is a physics professor at the University of Toronto, as well as a musician and a data sonification specialist. When he was growing up, he loved both music and astronomy, but he couldn't find a way to marry the two passions.
But as I grew older, it became actually a source of conflict, because everyone told me I had to pick one or the other. And I kept these kind of two worlds in parallel, knowing they would eventually crash at some point and explode, or I don't know what was going to happen.
This crash has produced some pretty spectacular work. Matt's sonifications have been heard across the world. Probably his most famous sonification is the clip you just heard.
We had to give the system a voice. It's not actually making any sound, but we can still hear the rhythm and harmony of this faraway solar system.
Matt released a sonification in 2017 with astrophysicist Dan Tamayo and musician Andrew Santaguida. The response was overwhelming. The video got a ton of press and was written about in places like New York Times and Gizmodo.
It's always just overwhelming how much people connect with the sounds that we've created of these images. So it's an art form, but in the process, they are learning something about the astronomical system and also just about information and how you can experience the same information using two different senses.
In the years since, Matt has gone on to create more sonifications and work with NASA, like this one of a black hole. If you want to join the fun and see Matt's very cute dog, he has a series explaining how to make your own sonifications.
I'm Matt, and this is Marty, and we're going to show you how to convert any data into music using Python.
But these sonifications are more than just a musical exercise or a vanity project for Russo. He started the System Sounds Outreach Project with Dan and Andrew to start making sonifications.
We wanted to be able to convert astronomical images into sound, partially because we thought it was interesting and fun, but also to make those images accessible to people that don't have sight, people who are blind or visually impaired.
Russo's not the only one pushing for this. Astronomical sonification was started by a blind astronomer. We'll have more about that story in our next episode, but this was always the goal. Expand our understanding of the stars, especially for people with disabilities.
Before we go, let's listen to an excerpt from a never-before-heard sonification of gravitational waves that Matt and Andrew made. Gravitational waves ripple across the fabric of space-time thanks to big energy events, like a colliding black hole. These waves clue astronomers in to the structure and composition of the universe. Matt wanted to capture this.
Next episode, we'll be digging into the origins of astronomical sonification and why sound can be just as useful as sight to understand space.
And I heard it. Yes.
Science Quickly is produced by Jeff Del Dizio, Talika Bose, Kelso Harper, and Corinne Leon. Our theme music was composed by Dominic Smith.
Matt Russo and the open source website Two-Tone provided the sonifications you heard in this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to Science Quickly wherever you get your podcasts. For more in-depth science news and features, go to scientificamerican.com. And if you like the show, give us a rating or a review.
For Scientific American Science Quickly, I'm Jason Drakeford.
And I'm Timmy Braddock. See you next time.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2007. It was that morning that a bridge under construction in Vietnam collapsed. The disaster happened in Kinh Thao, about 100 miles south of Ho Chi Minh City. It was a suspension bridge project to cross the Hao River. The project was run by Japanese firms working with the Vietnamese government. 250 workers were on site at the project when the disaster happened. 55 people were killed and another 100 were injured due to the collapse. One reason cited for the collapse was that torrential downpours had caused the support structure for the bridge to sink. Another possible reason was that the scaffolding on the construction project was too weak to hold the weight. When it failed, it took down a section of the 4-lane concrete deck approach ramp with it. The fallen section weighed between 1,500 and 2,000 tons. The collapse was considered the worst disaster in the history of the Vietnamese construction industry. Man Hung, leader of one of the construction teams, described what occurred, saying, quote, "We suddenly heard a great explosion at a bridgehead. Dust covered a great airspace while workers screamed out. The scene was so terrible, the whole great block fell on people below. Vietnamese, along with Japanese and Filipino rescue volunteers, rushed to attempt to find survivors. 1,000 local residents gave blood at the hospital for those injured. The rescue efforts were hampered by the danger of a further collapse. They had to use a crane to clear the rubble. Finally, after 4 torturous days, the rescue efforts were called off. The bridge project was completed in 2010. The names of the fallen workers are inscribed on a memorial." Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, a small scant dash. A mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 54 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy conditions. Just had another band of rain drop some water here in the last couple of hours, but it looks like we'll have sun and clouds mixed throughout the day. Highs in the upper 60s, winds out of the west-southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Partly cloudy skies this evening, increasing clouds with periods of showers late with lows in the low to mid-50s. Winds out of the southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. It looks like we're going to get about a quarter inch of rain overnight. Then showers in the morning. Then partly cloudy in the afternoon with highs near 68, similar to today. Winds will be light and variable, and it looks like we will be getting something less than a quarter inch of rain tomorrow, and it looks like we maybe have some rain off and on through Friday. So that's actually a good thing. Ragweed pollen is rated high here in the little village of Rogue River, Oregon. The air quality index for the Rogue River Valley region is in the good range at 19 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is moderate at level 5, so I would still take care. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.09 inches. Visibility is at 6 miles. And relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. And of course, that is the Weather Underground. London is 72 degrees and sunny. Paris is 78 and sunny. Rome is 86 and sunny. Kabul is 62 and clear. Kyiv is 70 degrees and sunny. Hong Kong is 84 degrees and clear. Tokyo is 76 and cloudy. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 52 degrees and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 62 on the ocean. Chicago, Illinois is 66 degrees with lightning and thunderstorms and a flood watch. And New York, New York is 60 degrees Fahrenheit with rain showers and a coastal flood watch warning. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the Associated Press's World Desk brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. The Biden administration announced yesterday, Monday, that it is offering a $2 billion loan to Poland, which has been a hub for weapons going into Ukraine to support the Allies' defense modernization. The State Department said in a statement that Poland is a stalwart ally of the U.S., whose security is vital to the collective defense of NATO's eastern flank, and that such funding is reserved for Washington's most important security partners. The U.S. government is also providing Warsaw up to $60 million for the cost of the loan in foreign military financing, which would support urgent procurements of defense articles and services from the United States, the State Department said. The $60 million loan is a subsidy meant to ensure that Warsaw can secure favorable terms for the loan. Poland has been a staunch supporter of Ukraine since Russia's full-scale invasion of the country, handing over a large number of its own tanks, fighter jets, and other equipment. It has also been a hub for most of the Western weapons going to Ukraine. It has been undergoing a process of modernization to replace what it gave away, much of which was based on old Soviet technology, putting in orders with the U.S. and South Korean defense companies. Recently, the Polish-Ukrainian relationship has seen strains due to a trade dispute centered on Ukrainian grain entering the Polish market and driving down the prices Polish farmers can get. Analysts noted that Poland has already, in fact, given Ukraine most of what it has to give in weapons, and the statement by Prime Minister Morawiecki that his country no longer will be sending any more weapons to Ukraine was made ahead of the Polish election and did not mean much, but it also raised concerns that Western support for Ukraine could be weakening. U.S. officials have sought to play down the spat, praising Poland's role in helping Ukraine and noting that it is in Poland's strategic interest for Ukraine to prevail against Russia.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Jamie Keaton of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Independent UN-backed human rights experts said they have turned up continued evidence of war crimes committed by Russian forces in their war against Ukraine, including torture, some of it with such brutality that it led to death and rape of women aged up to 83 years old. Members of the UN Independent Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine also expressed concerns about allegations of genocide by Russian forces and said they are looking into them. The team said its evidence showed crimes committed on both sides, but vastly more, and a wider array of abuses were committed by Russian forces than by Ukrainian troops. The commission delivered its latest finding in an oral update to the Human Rights Council, laying out its observation about unlawful attacks with explosive weapons, sexual and gender-based violence, and other crimes in the war, which entered its 20th month on Sunday. The commission is concerned by the continued evidence of war crimes committed by Russian armed forces in Ukraine during its first mandate, Commission Chair Eric Mose told the council, which created his investigative team in March of last year, just days after Russian forces invaded. The panel is now working under a second mandate. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.